Hello. Thank you for joining us today. Um, this is Mas for joining us. I am Natasha Suba. I will be your facilitator this afternoon. I am a board member with the Commission of Decolonization and then I also teach at the University of Guam. And so it is my pleasure to introduce these three ladies here who have been very instrumental in the decolonization movement. So we'll start with um, Final low. Okay. Dr. Laura Torres Souder is the president and CEO of Souder Botanics and Associates, Inc. Dr. Souder earned her BA at Emmanuel College in Boston and an MA PhD in American Studies from the University of Hawaii as a joint doctoral intern at East West Center. She completed a postdoctoral Ford Foundation Minority Fellowship at DePaul University in Chicago. Dr. Souder has been part of research efforts sponsored by South Pacific Commission, UNESCO, and other entities on the effects of modernization and the development on Pacific Island people, language, and culture. Dr. Souder was the co-editor of Tomorrow's Self-Determination and has recently co-authored 4 books with Dr. Sania Batansis, her husband, in a series entitled IAB Insights. She currently serves as the chair of the Guam Indigenous Heritage Alliance and the Commission of Phoenix Timor. Round of applause for Sanan. A former Senator Cristobal, or as I like to call her, Sino Hope. She's the current vice chairperson of the Commission of Tomorrow Language, Culture, and History. Sino Hope received her bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Guam, was a school administrator and a senator and presenter over the years at various United Nations committee meetings, and she continues to be active politically and linguistically. Sino Hope. Okay, and then the last individual on the panel, Dr. Vivian Dames, born in the Philippines and a resident of Guam since 1952. Dr. Dames has made the island her lifelong home. She is a retired professor from the University of Guam, where she founded CSWE, accredited BSW program, and co-founded the Women and Gender Studies program. With over 4 decades of experience, she has worked to advance social work and strengthen human services in Guam and the region. Her advocacy spans decolonization, prison reform, land use, economic justice, women's rights, and environmental protection. Dr. Damas holds a PhD in social work and political science, and her scholarship focuses on belonging, citizenship, and colonial legacies. Dr. Damas. So the panel today, we're going to focus on social issues and connections to decolonization. So we are so grateful to have these three ladies here. And we'll start with question number 1. Okay. Can you share how your background and work intersect with social justice or community advocacy? Who I want to start first? These two are pushing me to say you first. Okay, I'll start. Uh, you know, I've been called many things, but my one of my favorite titles is Sailalo, and that is because uh, you young people have given me that title, and it brings with that title a tremendous amount of responsibility to share and impart wisdom. Now, we don't become wise just because we get old, right? We become wise because we began the journey that you are beginning, some of you who are very young, or those of you who are, you know, well into the journey, have discovered that there are many people who have influenced the way we think. There are many people who have triggered a sense of awe, a sense of surprise, a sense of questioning that has contributed to our consciousness. So, in my journey, and my journey as a sociologist, I was a trained sociologist in my undergraduate work and in my master's degree. It gave me a sense of understanding about how to look at people's experience and how to challenge that experience with what was called the sociological imagination. So I started that way. And then I studied to be an historian and studied revisionism. And that really changed my way of looking at history because I learned history from the conventional perspective, right? You learned about great men doing great things to not so happy people. And so I learned the colonial perspective of history of Guam. I learned the colonial perspective of history. And then I began to study with people who were actually challenging that perspective and asking questions of history that we had not dared to ask before. And history will never give you an answer to a question you have not asked. So I began to ask different kinds of questions. And lo and behold, I got different kinds of understandings of what was possible. So that was my historical training. I was part of the diaspora for 30 years, believe it or not. And I always came home, so I never felt disconnected from home. Never knew I was in the diaspora until I came home to stay again in 2015. And we were talking about the diasporic vision and hopes and yearnings of people who have left home. And then someone said, "Well, Loling, I mean, you were in the diaspora for 30 years. Can you shed light on the issue?" And I thought, "No, I haven't been in the diaspora." And they said, "What are you talking about? You've been living in Chicago for nearly 30 years." And then I realized that I was part of the diaspora, even though I always felt that I was at home and always connected to home and always coming home, right? And so I began to understand what that concept of being away meant in terms of getting to understand who you are here at home. Because your perspective changes when you leave home and begin to look at home from a different light. So that was another part of my experience that helped shape uh, my advocacy. Now, nobody can see me or hear me without my talking about Chamorro language, right? I'm a Chamorro language activist. I am a Chamorro self-determination activist. I realize that I've been that all my life, but it's coming into who you are and discovering who you are that helps you to determine where you put your priority, your energy in your activism. Uh, my journey has informed my sense of social justice and my community engagement because I realized the hunger that comes from being disconnected with your people, with your language, and with a history that we have been so alienated from because of our colonial experience. And so, firsthand, I realized that because my identity was always in jeopardy. I was born light skinned. I was always told when I was growing up, you can't be some more because you're too white, or your dad's howdy, or you can't be some more because you speak English too well. Can you imagine this? You can't be some more because you're too smart. Can you imagine that? Okay? And so, even though I was internalizing a very strong message from my nana about my being chamorro, because nana used to say, "Tisiya na on mapotiditiha." You get it? You can't be pregnant just a little bit. You're either pregnant or you're not. So you can't beat chamorro just a little bit. You are chamorro or you're not. And you are chamorro. And so I learned that from my nana, but I was also learning all this half caste business, this inauthentic business, this, you're not truly Chamorro because, by the way, there are no true Chamorros because none of you have pure blood. Those are colonial arguments that mean to destroy and mean to demean and mean to get the Chamorro out of you. But the wonderful thing is, and I have discovered this, and language is the weapon for this, you cannot take the Chamorro out of a Chamorro person. And our language, more than any other connector, keeps that tie, that uh, Italianima nata intact. So those of us who are struggling with identity, thank God I've really resolved my identity in my mind, whole heart and soul. But those of us who are struggling, use that struggle to inform your activism, because there's a lot of energy in in that struggle and in that discovery. And so that's how my journey has informed my quest for social justice, and that's what I continue to work toward.
Mine is not as eloquent or uh, like Chloe. I grew up as a daughter of a Marine and a Chamorro mother who grew up here in Guam. And we always spoke Chamorro. My grandmother lived with us, and everybody around us spoke Chamorro. So it was never deprived of me. It was encouraged and uh, to live as a Chamorro. I lived it, and my father was kind of incidental, and he later was uh, divorced from my mom when it was about 10, 11 years old. And so there were eight of us, and we just continued to speak Chamorro. And so we just understood the world to be who we are. So we never really had challenges, uh, you know, coming from the outside. People always spoke to us in Chamorro. And the only issues that I had was when I was in high school. I attended JFK uh, public high school, and you know, I spoke tomorrow, and I spoke English. I had to really learn English, and so that experience taught me that I could be both. I can be tomorrow, and I can also speak English. And I wondered, how is this going? What is this going to mean to me? Uh, I met my husband when I was in high school. I was a senior in high school, and nothing has changed really. And so this idea of tomorrow self determination, when it came about, I was done with high school, and I was attending um, the Commission on Self Determination meetings, and it was just an interest. And then I got really sold into it, and so that's how I became involved in the work that it has to be, and somebody has to do the work. So I just took it upon myself, and you know, with it, and so it wasn't anything um profound or deep. It was just part of my life. And having my children, my five children, my adopted son, my youngest works an adopted son, um, and they just seem to grow up just fine. I didn't have any problems, and so I thought, well, for self determination. What is this going to? How is this going to improve my life? And so, uh, I had finished college at the University of Guam, and um, I just went along with everything that was going on about at that time. And so I just deepened my own knowledge of the issues at the time, and that's how I came about. It wasn't any big push or anyone pushing me or any imagined thought, that I should do this it was a natural thing for me. So I thought every Chamorro should be doing this. And so that's how I became involved and deepened my thoughts in it and my involvement in it, and I just dedicated my life to it.
Buenas, everybody. Um, the perspective that I bring today is of somebody who views decolonization not as a political process, but as a social cultural process, a process of ongoing kind of narrating who you are. Um, I think that the roots of that uh, really stem from my legacy as a dual colonized person. And when I say that, I mean that anyone coming out of the Philippines shares with the Marianas the experience of Spanish colonization. So when I came to Guam, I brought that legacy with me. It also stems from my own personal history because I learned very early on about the power of U.S. military imperialism, also about the heartbreak of losing home. My mother was an American whose father was in the first wave of Philippine nationals to join the U.S. Navy. He met my grandmother in Bremerton, big shipyard community. Um, and when my mother was around 8 or 9 years old, she got on a ship with her family and came to the Philippines. So my mother is a war survivor, but she's a war survivor being a mestiza American in the provinces of the Philippines. It was harsh. It was hard. So, like people here, I grew up hearing about the stories of the war and the stories of survival. I think that although political status is an exercise to make a political choice, I think decolonization is a responsibility of everybody. Everybody has to decolonize. And for the us in Guam, who were made up of a community of people colonized in different ways with different colonial histories. And one would think, you would think, that because we had so many people with different experiences of colonization, you would think that everybody should be behind the decolonization and tomorrow self determination. But that isn't the case. And so a big part of my life has been about trying to really unpack that, to question it. And my journey is different because it hasn't been about discovering and learning and becoming firmer in one's identity as a tomorrow. It's been the experience of somebody who Guam is my home, but it's not my homeland. So I don't have that deep, profound connection to the land, walking on it where my ancestors are buried. I don't have that experience. I didn't grow up surrounded by family. I had no grandparents. I had no cousins. I had no aunties. And so my creating family was a very deliberate, conscious thing of creating family and what is now my home. I'm also a social worker. And as mentioned, I've been involved in social work education for about 40 years now, doing work here and in the region. And I'm very proud of the fact that at the University of Guam, we've been able to create a niche which teaches social work education in a way that is not just focused on social responsibility or social care and compassion, although all those things are important. It's also about human rights, social justice, self determination on multiple levels. And so that's the perspective that I bring today to these questions. So, next question. Oh, Harmony, you will be timekeeping. So if you get to your right, um, she'll let you know like what your time is also. Okay. Oh, excuse me. Some people argue that political status is a distant issue and not as urgent as everyday concerns like jobs, healthcare, land loss, and housing struggles. How would you respond to that? Okay. The psyche of a people, the way people think about themselves, right, is very critical to the way they view issues. Now, this morning's panel clearly established the case that uh, our entire lives are linked with our quest for self determination because in the economy, our health, our well being, our environment, housing issues, the social pathology that we experience as a community, the drug addiction, the violence in the home, sexual violence, all of these are traumas that have been exacerbated, that have been worsened by our colonial experience. And so it's hard sometimes to make those connections. But one I wrote a paper a long time ago at Viv. I don't know if you remember during the Social Word Conference that you led years ago, I think in the 70s. I wrote a paper called Psyche Under Siege. And in that paper, I asked Uncle Sam to look, or I made the lament, look what you've done to us, right? Today, we have the agency. I have discovered without, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that we have the agency to redirect those questions towards ourselves, right? So, what are we doing to ourselves if we don't think seriously about how health issues or public safety issues or housing issues or environmental issues are not connected with who has control over our land, who has control over the decisions that are made regarding what we can do with our land? Because, as Viv pointed out, homeland is a very different concept than being home as a resident of Guam, right? And so sometimes we're afraid to talk about these things honestly because we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. But we have to talk about these things honestly if we're going to unpack how we understand the connection between these life issues and Chamorro self determination. And so I invite you to think seriously about this. It's not easy to talk about. And a lot of times you're going to get the kind of resistance that we have gotten in the 50 years that Hope and I and Viv have been about this business. But when we started this movement, right, in the 70s and 80s, what became known as the quest for Chamorro self determination in this generation during the American post-war World War II period, such words as colony were not even on our vocabulary. We didn't talk about colony or decolonization. We didn't even know that we were indigenous people, for goodness sake, until this man who's standing at the back of the room, Samuel Betances, came and provoked this kind of discussion in these sessions that we had. And we began to change the discourse because we began to discover that we didn't even know ourselves. Then we didn't know who we were, beginning with what we called ourselves. So these kinds of things which we take for granted anymore were totally unheard of. As Neil, I mean, I don't know where Levin understood the sense, but when he talks about how these words were not even in the vocabulary 50 years ago, they're so much a part of the vocabulary that we use today to describe our condition. So this consciousness is so critical, and the connections are very, very critical.
So the question is,
The question is, some people argue that political status is a distinct issue and not as urgent as everyday concerns like jobs or healthcare, land loss, housing struggles. How would you respond to that?
I don't think many people realize that jobs, healthcare, those issues, and many other major issues are related to our political status. And it it bugs me today that people can sit around and talk about getting another job, you know, or seeking uh, better health care without thinking of its impact on our political status. Because everything that we do on this island is related to our lack of uh, political status. It's not a distant issue, and it is an urgent. And although we think it's urgent today, as I thought it was urgent 30 years ago, uh, it's still urgent. And to think that it's something that can wait is really dangerous. I think that we all have a job in keeping it alive, and this conference keeps it alive, and this commission on decolonization keeps the discussion alive. And I think that we should continue to encourage it because it is uh, to me, the most important issue that needs to be resolved before we start talking about healthcare issues. Say, for example, we know that in this region, healthcare can be handled regionally. We can have a healthcare system for this region. Uh, Yet, to think like that, or to think of jobs that are related in for this region is far fetched, but it isn't. They are all related, and I think that we should start caring and should continue to, uh, you know, talk about it because it is an issue that is urgent and very important. And I think that the political status that we end up with will be uh, determining the kinds of issues, smaller issues that we will be talking about that relates to health and jobs or other important issues.
I remember being in a conference in Arizona, and I just finished presenting a paper on child welfare and political status and the way in which that sort of lands in the different political jurisdictions in this region. And this guy came up to me afterwards and he says, "So I don't get this thing about, political status. Like, well, why is that so important? I mean, you're Americans, you're like us, like this." And I said to him, I said, "Here's the difference. How many times this past week did you think about the political status of Arizona? How many times did you think about?" And he goes, "Not once." I said, "That's the difference between you and the people in Guam. Because we think about political status almost daily. There's always some sort of a reminder of how we are betwixt and between. We call it this limbo land. We call it, neither here nor there, neither fish nor fowl." And I remember once, Loli, when I was interviewing you for my dissertation, we talked about one of the skills that we develop here is the ability to live with contradiction on so many different levels. We have to live with these contradictions all the time. So, to the question um, about political status and I don't want to talk about housing and jobs. I want to talk about what's really difficult to talk about, social welfare. Because social welfare is a much tougher subject. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that what is social welfare about? It's about dependency. So, of all of our social institutions, social welfare is the one that really grabs you in the gut. It's about dependency because talking about it has to remind us about our dependency on other levels. I want to give you just a couple of examples of uh, ways in which I see this sort of problematic. In social welfare, one of the sort of current discussions right now has to do with, and has been for many years, has been the problem of foster homes. We don't have enough foster homes. How come the local people don't want to take in their own kids? You hear this a lot. What you don't hear, you don't hear about the history of the traditional practices of bauxite, for example. You don't hear about what happened when the American legal system was introduced, requiring certain legal processes in order for adoption to take place. You don't hear about the incredibly grueling, rigorous process to get licensed as a foster home. And when you have 35% of the population living at or below the poverty line, you have a lot of families who are willing to open their homes and their hearts, but they can't qualify because they don't meet the licensure requirements. They can't provide that extra room. That child has to have their own room and some of the other requirements. We don't hear about that. We're also caught in this strange situation in terms of political status with regard to international adoption. I know this issue well because I went through international adoption. I went through the incredibly rigorous process of international adoption under what is now called the Hague Convention. The Hague Convention had a good intent to protect children from being trafficked across borders. But what it did for those of us in Guam, like myself, who wanted to adopt relative children from the Philippines, we were faced with an incredibly expensive, incredibly long process. I know people who were in the queue to finalize adoption for 7 to 9 years. Sometimes the kids aged out before they could even be adopted. And part of that is because of our status, we don't have any Hague certified adoption agencies. We don't have any Hague certified adoption lawyers. And so we have to go to another state like Honolulu and work with their agencies and their lawyers. The State Department was supposed to provide consultation and assistance to child welfare here in Guam so that we could participate more efficiently and effectively in that treaty arrangement for international adoption. It never happened. The State Department never came through with that help, leaving our systems here to try to figure it out on their own. And here's another curious flip side to that. You want to adopt a relative child from the Philippines, you're looking at 7 to 9 years. But somebody at Guam, a military family, can get on a plane, go to one of the freely associated states, and adopt a child there very quickly because of their political status, because of their being able to have a passport that allows that child to come into the country, into Guam, without all the hoops that are required in international adoption anywhere else. Those are just a couple of examples, but there are many that I could point to that are confusing, confounding, contradictory,
and yet affects fundamentals in terms of people's lives and family making.
That's a quick list, but I'm so sorry. What's the good now with you? Sorry, can we we're gonna move on to stay with that we should I not say? Well, only just there's a portion in the panel for audience staff. It's okay. Okay. Next question. So, in your view and line of work, in your research background, in your activism, how has colonialism affected the self perception of our community members, particularly how Indigenous Chamorros view themselves in our community?
Our identity has been in crisis throughout our colonial experience, and never more so than in our generations, in mine and yours, since the period after World War II. Our people have been consistently challenged in our identity. We have been told that our language should be forgotten because it's going to interfere with our ability to be good Americans, to succeed in school. Our parents were convinced that that was the case, and so many parents chose not to speak to their children in Chamorro. So 3 generations of Chamorros have disassociated from learning Chamorro in the way that our ancestors taught Chamorro, right? Which was generation into generation of it. So with the loss of our language comes the loss of our connection to many of our cultural practices. And consequently, who's speaking? It's next. Oh, uh, to many of our values, many of our traditions come through the teaching of our language and the speaking of our language with each other through generations. We have suffered the consequences of that loss through our colonial experience. So if anybody tells you that we're all good and Chamorros are proud, Chamorros wear sinahis, Chamorros have all kinds of tattoos and accoutrements that promote a well-being, a solid identity, those are superficial signs. They're important signs, they're symbolic signs, but what is Chamorro is what is inside of your head. Okay? That's where our identity lands. And when our identity has been challenged and fractured and pummeled, and you've been told generation after generation that your culture is no longer alive, and if it is, it's residual, it will disappear in time, that we have to be modern Americans, that we have to be modern citizens, global citizens of the world, we somehow internalize that message to mean that our being Chamorro is an interference. Folks, our being Chamorro is our strength because being Chamorro is how we can survive. Our language has been surviving over a 4,000-year experience, right? And so the question I have to you young people is the survival of our language and consequently our culture and consequently our values is in your hands to decide. Are we going to be the generation of Chamorros that cuts become a umbilical cord to our culture? Right? Because it is in our identity that our survivability is stored or is connected or is energized or is driven. And so, yes, colonization has had a tremendously negative impact on our identity. But have we lost our identity? My challenge to you is that if we continue to learn to speak Chamorro, we will never lose sight of what Chamorro means to us.
So we have lost land. We have had housing struggles and the ongoing military buildup reflects a build-up while we are building down or we are using uh, housing for our people. And so, do I identify with that? Yes, I do. Because my family did not own land. We didn't have land taken from us. We had a small plot where we built, my mother and father built a wooden structured house in Sinalanya. And so I thought everybody, the whole neighborhood had the same thing. But yet at school is where, at the institution, the educational institution, is where the difference was made. We were punished. I went through the school system that punished us for being tomorrow, speaking tomorrow, doing things tomorrow, anything tomorrow. It is not allowed at school. And so I went through that school system. And that's what really uh, got my attention. It was the only language that I loved, that I learned, that I grew up with at home. That's what we speak because my grandmother lived with us. And we only spoke English when my father is around. So it really impacted my life. And then, some of the things that were emphasized in the school system were kind of out of this world, like, during programs, during um, the end of the school year, where there's programs, we're dancing gulas and we're doing all kinds of crazy things that we've never done before. And so I was just caught between that and what's going on at home. So I lived across the street from the elementary school that I went to up to sixth grade and then on to JFK. Um, so the difference was across the street, it's different. Life is different. And so living like that really can change you. It can question you, question your identity. You start questioning yourself, what is right? What is the right thing to do? And so you just kind of hang in there and you attach yourself to those classmates that can speak tomorrow, that you can, intimate with and have good conversations about and go to their homes and after school, you know, enjoying life after school. But it was the school system that I grew in that created this difference in my life. And then, of course, I only went to the University of Guam. And that's when I started to get it all out. Because at the university, you are able to speak your mind and there's a lot of freedom there and you can express yourself. But yes, we have to hold in all those things and keep it out of touch with the officials.
My dissertation research focused on trying to look at what does it mean to belong to a nation? What does it mean to be an American and belong to America? And what does it mean to belong to a people as opposed to a nation? And I want to acknowledge that these two women here were incredible teachers to me about the meaning of belonging to a people. And I think that that term is so powerful, but it's one that has been destroyed in this historical context. It's been because of colonization, not just American, but Spanish, German, Japanese occupation, that split the Marianas in terms of the people. And then in terms of Guam, there's no place in the uh, political culture and language to talk about peoplehood in the context of Guam. So the US federal government views the people here as being like ethnic minorities. There's no recognition of peoplehood. And I think that fundamental change in this historical process, erasing the possibility of being able to see yourself as being part of a people and only putting forth as a viable alternative that you must belong to the United States and belong to the United States only on the terms that we will dictate for you. I think that has had a profound impact on so many levels in terms of consciousness here.
So how will a change in political status allow the people of Guam to better address social issues that are most prevalent in our community?
We talk about freedom, we talk about rights. They're freely, right? But do we really understand the inalienable right, which is self determination? I think that we really need to give pause and think about that seriously. We talk about nation building. How do we become a nation? Who are we talking about when we talk about nation building? How did the United States become a nation? How did the United States, the people in the United States, pursue their quest for self determination? Self determination is inherently built into the American Constitution. How do we consider these things in relation to ourselves, right? I think that's those questions bear thinking seriously about as we look at this quest for political status. What does that mean? Is the quest for is self-determination, the quest for self-determination, equal to becoming either a state, an independent nation, or a freely associated nation, and with whom? We have to ask these questions. We have to come to some understanding as a community if we're going to make choices, right? And how is this going to resolve the issue of an identity crisis, the issue of the loss of language, the issue of peoplehood, as Viv reminded me that when we talked about Jamal's self-determination, we always talked about it in the context of peoplehood. What does that mean to you, young people? What does indigenous identity mean to you? What does indigeneity really mean? Do we wear it? Do we vote with it? Do we make decisions with it? Do you speak with it? These are hard questions to answer. And sometimes we're so mamahlo, napamalo, taimamalo, right? That we don't know how to respond appropriately. But navigating through that sea of contradictions that we as colonized people have had to navigate through isn't an easy task, and we can sometimes lose our way. But if you talk about it, you begin to bring it out into the open, and you begin to explore it differently. I just ask you to think seriously about it. And what do we do? When we talk about it, when you ask questions about it, we are engaged in cultural sovereignty, a concept that we don't often talk about either. Who are the performers of culturally sovereign acts. You and me. You and me. The federal government isn't engaged in cultural sovereignty, right? The military as an institution is not engaged in cultural sovereignty. But you at home, at work, at school, in our communities, we are engaged in cultural sovereign acts, if we so choose. Because if we can understand cultural sovereignty, we can understand that it is the one form of sovereignty that nobody can take away from us. Only we have the power to give it up. So as we think about these issues, as we think about these concepts that we're throwing out, right? Including the concept of cultural sovereignty, think about what the power that you have to act as a culturally sovereign person, as an indigenous person, as a person who belongs to a peoplehood that you want to engage in continuity with, right? Think about that.
So we have to think of ourselves as different, as different culturally, uh, different historically. We have been involved for thousands of years, 4,000 years at least. Uh, we has built a linguistic ability to communicate with each other, and it's still here even after colonization by Spain, by America for 2.5 years, by the Japanese, and back again to America. We still have our language. So we have unity by speaking our language, by continuing to improve our language abilities. And we have a connection to the land. Many of you have ancestors whose lands were taken by the military. Tony here speaks about land almost all the time. I hear him. I'm grateful that I don't have land because I didn't have that story to tell. But I enjoy the land that is available. I know that at least 25%, if not a little more, is in the military's hands. So we have lost land, we have lost our language use, but we can bring it back. And so today we have language law that allows us to teach a Chamorro language in school, and we need to upgrade that because it becomes 20 minutes a day in high school. Whereas at the beginning, it starts with a whole, I mean, you now have schools that are taught in Chamorro. So that will keep us going. But I think the time has come where we need to connect what we have, value it, and go to international uh, connections and plead our case. The Chamorro people have to do this because it's just taking too long. It's been 230 years since the Spanish colonized us, and then 115 or 125 years the Americans. The Japanese, 2.5 years. We have to find ways to save our people. That's what I think we should do. And we have the hate. We can take it to international courts of justice. We have been going to the UN, telling the United Nations in front of the US ambassador, the US delegates, about what is happening. Well, because Guam is still on the list of non self governing territories. So we need to stop it by learning tomorrow, learning our history. And that's, to me, the way that we can lift it up, help each other out, and move forward and engage in all these forums that is being presented to us by the commission. Now, the commission's job is to educate. Our job is to keep it going, to make sure that the commission does their job. Because we are going to lose. We are the only ones who are going to lose. And we've been here for 4,000 years. We've got to keep it on. For the sake of our children, for the sake of tomorrow, uh, peoplehood.
I think if you ask most Filipinos, uh, are you glad you had a change in political status and you're now independent? You know, they will complain and tell you all the problems wrong with the country. But I'll tell you, they're gonna say we're glad that we're an independent country. If you talk to people from the freely associated states, they know well the problems that they're having. But if you ask them, are you glad you're no longer a trust territory? Are you glad you're a freely associated state? Most of the ones I've talked to about it would say, yes, we're glad. I think a turning point for me in this question was in 84, and I had an opportunity to go on sabbatical. And I spent most of that year traveling through the South Pacific, visiting the English speaking nations, new nations, freely associated states like in the Cook Islands. And one of the things that I was looking at was patterns of development, and particularly how they use money from other countries for development. Because there was this view here that, Guam couldn't exist. It was somehow going to fall in the Marianas Trench if we disconnected that relationship with the United States. But we don't have to go far to find incredible examples all throughout the Pacific of cultural sovereignty, political sovereignty. Yes, you have to give up some things with political status, and a lot of it comes down to, what are we willing to give up? What are we willing to give up? What are we willing to take responsibility for, to work on for ourselves? The big difference has to do with who's making the rules, who's sitting at the table, and how much does this community get to decide for itself. That's fundamentally what a change in political status leads us to. Either closer with the United States, another experiment in free association, U.S. version free association. We don't quite know what that would look like. It may not look like the freely associated states that we know today, or independence. And like I said, go to the other parts of the Pacific. There are many small places that are independent, and they're thriving on their terms. I think that part of decolonization has to be about sparking, igniting, and keeping alive a political imagination, imagining a future, imagining a way of belonging, not just to ourselves, but imagining a way of belonging in the world, right? How are we going to position ourselves in the world? A lot of times when people say Guam's too small, population's too small, I think that shows a very limited political imagination. I picture other models for being in the world. What would the world look like if we had a Micronesian union instead of a European union? Imagine that. If we had these sovereign jurisdictions who formed together in a union to, to protect what is precious and to share resources and to control this part of the Pacific, that would be a tremendous power, tremendous power. But it first has to start with determining what will happen here. Thank you.
Thank you for those responses. So all of you have played integral roles in elevating the voices of tomorrow women and allies through your advocacy of public service, scholarship, and storytelling. Why is the leadership of women so essential in the decolonization process of our island?
We all know that women play a very big role, especially here on this island. We are a matrilineal culture. We are a matrifocal culture, mother-centered culture, and women lead, whether they are seen or heard of or heard from. Right? We often talk about women leading from behind, but women are clearly leading from the front as well. And we have a matahaka, which tells us that women do have the capacity to lead. Speaker Terlahi, who led the legislature for many years, showed us how women can lead in the most visible positions of legislative power. And women have led in many different ways, but we are essentially culture bearers and we are children bearers. So we have strong influence in the way that people think. I often challenge women in my feminist days of workshops. When women talk about having predators amongst us, right, um, and sexual violence is on the rise, and domestic violence is on the rise. Who are the primary caregivers and influencers of these boys that become predators in their adult lives? Right? So we ask ourselves, who are you rearing? Are you rearing pigs, predators, or partners? That was a topic that I used to discuss. Women do have a lot of influence. We influence the people who are around us in our families. Families make up communities, right? And women give birth to leaders, and they also give birth to people who do not think, people who do not act, and people who are afraid to act. So, I know everybody knows how I've written about Chamorro women organizations and Chamorro women leadership, and I've been accused of being, so pro woman that I'm against men, and I'm not, because no child could be born without a man involved in the process, right? But the point is that we do have power as women, especially in our families. So we need to step up to the task of having these conversations with our partners and with our kids and with our grandkids. The biggest obstacle in my mind to self determination at this point in time is other Choloros who refuse to see how connected our lives and our opportunities are to self-determination. We have to convince each other before we try to convince anybody else what's going on. And women have the greatest power to do that in the way that our lives are structured in our families. So, yes, women have not only the responsibility, uh, often the insight, but the power to change this, to turn this trajectory around. You know, Leland talks about how we really made so much progress in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And then we took a backslide, right? In terms of all the energies that were created, that crescendo with the, with the Commonwealth Act discussion and the introduction and all that went into that articulation. And then we became complacent. Folks, I don't know that we're complacent. I think we're comatose. So we just got to wake up. We've got to wake up and realize that our voices matter, and that if we don't make the decision, who's going to make it? China. Congress. Are you willing to let this Congress and this president make the decision for you? Why I'm not willing to shut up about this, because if we don't talk about it with each other, someone else is going to control the conversation.
Ibaho. Hmm? I'll just stay alone.
Because we need men and women and everybody willing to take leadership roles in different ways at different moments around different things. But when I think about, you know, key events, who's the one who organizes the key events to come together in our families, in our communities, in the churches? It's the women who are there, right? Because a lot of times we're the ones who bring what nurtures the body and the spirit, right? The tithes, the food. Um, and I like the metaphors talking about weaving and how women in different ways we learn how to get past the hurts, to get past the differences, and to weave together to make things together for the greater good, right? And I think that that's something that will continue to manifest itself in different ways. I also want to add that to that, because we started off this morning with Leland talking about we have to just end it, our military colony. And I think that part of the decolonization process is also about what do women say to our sons, our husbands, our boyfriends about the military. We have to find that way to still show love and respect for the people who serve in the military, but not let that hold us back from our critiques of militarism and militarization and military colonization.
So to jump off that Sanalo's very passionate speech, what I want to ask you guys is, what gives you the most hope about the decolonization movement today, and what concerns you the most?
What gives us the most hope? See, um, there's a lot of energy and youth, and that gives me a lot of hope, because this movement needs energy, right? We're getting a little older, you know. We're not. Our time is not over yet, okay? But we're getting a lot slower. and I'm freezing, and I just, I can't think well when I'm freezing. And I'm just fuku here, and I'm just shaking, and I'm thinking, okay, this is absurd. Why bowling? Well, okay, keep talking, okay. So I have a lot. I really do believe in the power of use. You know, uh, I recall being young once, and having so much imagination. So the one thing I have hope in is your imagination, is your dreaming about possibilities and not being stifled by, ay, only on Guam. Oh, tisiya matsoga na sa, tagi and tagini. You don't have that yet. Don't let it touch you too much, okay? Because protect your hope with all your might, but do something about your hope. Actionalize, operationalize your hope. Engage in cultural sovereignty. It's easier to engage in cultural sovereignty than it is to engage in colonialism. And yet we haven't really learned of the power of cultural sovereignty yet. But that's what gives me hope. What truly concerns me is the fascist ideology that pervades the United States, the colonial power that we are controlled by. That ideology is an ideology of erasure. And who are the first? Who are the first suspects? Right? Are people of color? Are people whose histories um, are viewed as expendable? And that's us. When we think about, I used to think about this whole conversation about erasure as kind of esoteric until it really came all in full force. Can you imagine erasing the history of the civil rights movement? Can you imagine erasing the history of slavery? Can you imagine erasing the history of the wiping out of the indigenous first peoples of the country called the United States? And yet that's being done now every day in many, many ways. And so the threat is real for us. If you can erase the history of millions of people of color in the United States, how easy is it and how big does the pencil need to have an erasure that can wipe out the existence of a nation of people in the far-flung areas of the Western Pacific? So this is what we have to be about. My greatest hope is that you won't let this happen, young people. My greatest fear is that the tide is so strong, it's tidal wave proportion, right? Can we survive that? Our people have survived tidal waves, earthquakes, super typhoons. We have the stuff. We have the stuff to survive. Are we going to use that to our advantage?
Nolan gives me a lot of hope. It's, it's, yeah,
So,
I was named after my grandmother and my aunt. So, um, you know, I used to be very active in political status. discussions and movements from the time of my time in the legislature, previous to that, and then after that. Now I have to think of what else can we do? What are those forums or opportunities that we can have that are still available to us today to move forward our dream of being sovereign, of maintaining sovereignty, cultural sovereignty, political sovereignty. And we have at our disposal the Hague. We can go there. But right now we are engaging in the United Nations slip. And when we did that back in the 70s, we also engaged Congress. And we find that the US military almost always never discusses political status. Political status is usually told to us that it's being thought of or being discussed at the Department of Interior. Now, why at the Department of Interior? We tried to discuss it at the Department of State. Could be a possibility. And so we still have other areas that we can embark on to bring our case to. But meanwhile, we have to do the work. We have to continue the groundwork here in Guam. And, somebody mentioned that there aren't that many people attending the conference today. Well, each one of us has that big responsibility now to go for and inform other others about the conference or about the possibilities of growing what we have learned here. And so we are here because the opportunity presented itself. Now I'm here because I'm already retired, I'm old, I'm ready to go to Tigua. But you know, I look back. Ron Ramirez gone. Ron Tihan is gone. Bennett Duke is gone. Cristobal is gone. These were my gangs back then. And then I had a stroke last year, and it has erased a lot of my memories. And so I'm struggling to get back on. And now I'm with the Commission on Language, Culture, and History. And we meet twice a month, plus that's officially, plus we're always meeting every week. So we have a lot of work to do. And I encourage you all to go forth and spread the word and be involved and just, you know, learn learn the tricks of the trade. Just spread it. Just be a friend to someone who is interested in it and then invite them. So each one of us can double that and then double that. And it will become. So from the smallest minuscule effort, we can make big things happen. And I encourage you to continue to be. As I look out there, I see Lonnie, I see Tony, I see Therese. These and our staff, these are just a few people in my hand. you can double that. You have that responsibility to take what you've learned today and go out there and talk to people. I mean, it doesn't have to be a big forum, but make yourself available and go to the Commission on Decolonization. Mel Wampet and staff are willing to provide materials and encourage your teachers. So, if those of you who have high school still, encourage your high school teachers. I see one high school teacher here. One. How many do we have? What? Yeah. How many do we have in the Guam schools that are interested that would this will impact their futures and their children's and children's? So, thus, you can see how it can go on and do what you can. And if you need help, come to the commission. Lolling is now our chairperson, and she's really great. She is. Yeah, but she makes things happen. And she has been very instrumental in the movement of the commission. So I really thank her. But I know that her heart is in this. And she's been gone for many years now. I don't know how long more she'll be here before she goes back to Chicago. But yeah, always she's small. So, folks, I really appreciate your attendance today. You weren't required to do this. You did this on your own, and this is the kind of stuff that will take you forward and continue to do so.
Mhm. As a child of the 50s and affected by the sort of emphasis on assimilation that prevailed at the time, especially as the child of immigrants. I was told growing up, oh, the Chamorros, they don't have any culture. They don't have this, they don't have that. That's the way racism showed itself to me at that age. I've been here long enough to have seen and appreciate how wrong those messages were for me. I mean, I look around now and everything from the incredible creative resources that are coming out of the commission to the young entrepreneurs that were at this recent event to looking at the just the human resource development that has happened to this community. We're so rich in our people, the resources, the capacities of people to move this community forward. That's what gives me hope. My fears, two fears. One, we have a president right now who is seemingly congenitally unable to take responsibility for anything. If it goes well, he takes credit for everything. And if it starts to go under, he blames somebody else. Just recently, he said, well, I don't know if I have to follow the Constitution, but I've got lawyers, they're the ones who will tell you. He's incapable of taking responsibility. We're in a dangerous moment right now with President Trump as the president of the United States. That's what scares me. I guess my other fear would be having been part of being a witness to what has happened over these decades and trying to find a place in the struggle. I hope that my daughters will always still be able to find a home in Guam, no matter what the political status or self-determination decisions are. Thank you.
This would be my last question. There are many youth in here, but then also we as adults, when we walk away from here, something I wanted to ask is if you could ask every tomorrow youth one question to spark their thinking about what the future looks like for Guang, what would it be?
Our question is, how does your decision to speak and develop Chamorro literacy impact our quest for Chamorro self-determination? How does your decision to speak and develop literacy in Chamorro impact our quest for Chamorro self-determination? And I know that, Lonnie, at least you asked your students to make sure that they reflect on their experience. So I hope you have them answer that question for you.
She's taking notes. Well, how does speech work? Somehow that you think that no causes of each other. She so that's a technical question for some kids in high school. Uh, I would ask a student of mine or a person I'm related to, what can you do to help our people understand their right of self determination? We love to party, we love to get together, we have groups, we're constantly coming in groups, opportunities abound. And today was another opportunity that many of you took advantage of. There's just a few of us, but each one of us kind of double that and so forth. And we can keep the interest going. You can't let it die because it is there. And even if we don't exercise the right of self determination, even if we don't vote in the plebiscite to decolonize, our children will, our children's children will. So we need to be educated in it. And therefore, we need to pose the question to them about what can they do. Because not everybody can do a lot. Loli and Dr. Vivian Dames here, they have they have classes. Rolling still teaches. So we can extend our knowledge, our small knowledge of our right to them by letting them get interested in it and by encouraging them to move forward. That's all that we can do.
Like Loling, I think the fundamental question for you is what does it mean to be Chamorro? In the 50s, you didn't even use, we said Romanian or we said local, right? Then it became Chamorro, Chamorro. Now it's what it is now. Each one of those stages represents a different stage of consciousness about what it means to be Chamorro. You need to be aware of that history that has transpired before you've come of age. And you need to tussle with the question yourself. What does it mean to be Chamorro? What does it mean to be an indigenous Chamorro within the framework of this iron fist and velvet glove of the United States control? What does it mean for you? How are you going to draw from the wells of your legacy, your experience, to move Guam forward and the people forward?
Okay. That ends my portion of the panel. I'll now go ahead and flip it over to the audience if you guys have questions.
what point? And I just walked.
Oh, some. I'm sorry. It's just
Okay, it makes me really nervous a lot.
well, the love.
Um, okay, I had so much to say, but I'm coming back tomorrow with it written down better. Uh, Firstly, I'm American. I'm from the 50s, New York. We had the Confederacy and we had the Axe. We fought a civil war, right? You're aware that 150 years ago, we had painful civil war, and it was painful to go through it, but we succeeded and we progressed. And I was raised by a woman who was cotton in the South, as per the colonialism of the United States. And when the colonies were free, we finally came together to make a better colony, a better country, and I support America, and I'm so proud to be here because I spent 40 years being independent on a yacht sailing out of Guam in 1996. I went through the entire FSM of Philippines, 5 years of Papua New Guinea, 10 years in the Philippines, 10 years in Malaysia, and my boat is stuck in Malaysia because Islamist, and I'm not going to be Islamophobic, but will not give me my rope back. And I landed here for COVID and had the opportunity to study. And this is where I first spoke Cristobal. I study you and the other gentlemen who were respectfully rewarded with your work in my community ensured community service plus and critical thinking for civic engagement, and I've and Pacific cultures. So I read about you in a textbook, and I never gratefully proud to meet you and be able to make your acquaintance, knowing that you were still here practicing and helping. So that's really important. And my president, he is our president. We are American. We hold U.S. passports. He can't vote, but I have such a strong inclination to say the man is he wants hostile takeovers of anything that he can control. So this is the first time in the opportunity since before the Spanish missionized your people who were at this naked beach drunk people. Could we not be on as opportunistic as the military has been of our land and use him in an opportunity to say, hey, we have a crystal meth problem. Come in here with your truck bus, deport or put to work people that will not take a Schedule 1 drug, crystal methamphetamine, which, could be real dangerous. Transfer it to a federally legal drug, marijuana, work on that to keep these people happy, and bring and offer in submission Guam as a state of the Union to then receive help and respect and the credit that you meet for what you've been through. I mean, everybody seems to want to talk about independence, but independence, as I've been on a yacht with 40 years of independence, there is no such thing as independence because there are people more powerful than you that will not allow you to live that way. No matter how right you are and how much objectives you had, you in this world that we live cannot be independent anymore. It doesn't exist. I mean, yes, maybe if we have money that MIGO has or some, live the wealthiest pet Switzerland, the wealthiest countries in the world to be independent, but you're not the wealthiest country in the world. And I think statehood would be, I wish I could live long enough to see Juan become a state and use him for what he's worth.
For that. Okay, I'm gonna take the mic because I think that this is a conversation that really should be grounded amongst the colonized. Um, the colonized people of this homeland who don't necessarily identify that this is not our president. This is a uh, president that we are unfortunately burdened with the impacts of, this horrible thing. But something I heard people chatter about as you were speaking earlier was the concept of cultural sovereignty. And I don't want to assume that everybody in the room knows what that is and what that means. And so I wanted to maybe for some of the other folks in the room to think about, you were talking about cultural sovereignty. And of course, that is something for Indigenous people to think about how to protect and practice our own culture. And that's also linked to spiritual sovereignty, how we can protect and practice their own spirituality, as well as land sovereignty. We get to decide what happens to our land, as is environmental sovereignty, right? And then political sovereignty sort of encompasses all of that. Wanted to ask you, maybe to expand on that a little bit more for some of the folks in the room who are hearing the concept of cultural sovereignty for the first time and how it's so critical. And then something I really appreciated you all speaking about was the importance of teachers, because teachers are like the real activists. Every time they get up, I mean, with Suba, is it one of them, right? You get up every day, you go to school. It just has been such a powerful tool of colonization historically. It's such a powerful tool for decolonization. And so teachers have such tremendous responsibility, but also, um, thinking about that, how all of those impacts are part of the social welfare impacts that Dr. Downs was talking about earlier too, right? The environmental sovereignty, the cultural sovereignty, spiritual and also body sovereignty, right? How someone has sovereignty over their own body, right? How those are all connected, and how um you know uh just how education really is going to help folks bridge those connections, but also understand the impacts of colonization on social welfare. And then, I mean, we might not get to answer it now, but also, just thank you all so much. It's just such an honor to hear from you, our Vecina, our Manyaing. This morning's panel was a bit of a bro fest, so this is very welcome and much appreciated. Although it was a great panel. I love them. It's good to hear from you all. But also, you know, I have heard Sina Hope speaking my whole life. She's been. I first heard her when I was in high school, going to the UN, being a senator. This is over 30 years ago. And Dr. Souder's book I read as a young person, and so, really, thank you for giving your lives, all of you, to you sacrifice you're a lot, and I don't think a lot of people know that and recognize it. So I'd also just wanted to take a minute to thank you all for doing that. Butterflies up there. And also, just to bring it to also Dr. Damas is speaking to also this importance of identifying or nurturing solidarity between Filipino central morals for decolonization and self-determination, especially because we have so much to learn from the Filipino struggle for independence, and especially in facing a fascist dictator, which is what the president of the United States is right now. We can learn from the resistance of the Filipino people against their fascist dictatorship, and we can apply some of that knowledge into practice here for our struggles for decolonization, but also in the tyranny that is on the rise right now. Thank you so much. This is Masi Tobrandi. Me.
Either, uh, I guess, well, there was something that the moderator said that got to me because, again, she asked you one question when really it's been this whole thoughtful questions. I'm beginning to think it's the duty of academia to pose questions for everyone to answer. So thank you for creating all of those questions. And one of those questions had to do with our beliefs regarding indigenous identity. Actually, I'm sorry, before that, an easier question for me to answer was also posed during this about, actually, I forgot the actual question, but it had to do with, should read the question down, but basically what I had helped craft it as an answer for was that the U.S., it's interesting that we're talking about physical distance as an idea between our current stake and decolonization as India destination. Because in By the way, hi, I'm Norman. I'm a Toronto Studies major at URG for education. So hi. I'm very honored to be here and asking you this question to you. In the American history classes that I was taught, the U.S. became a nation because of physical disconnect from a colonizer and their refusal to accept a lack of representation. So it's um, the difference between that process being that ultimately constancy was decided by a small group of people versus beers allowing everyone to be part of the process. So now another question. You asked what our thoughts on indigenous identity are. I believe that everyone has a right to identity, to determine for ourselves the entire network of our identity and the intersectionality that bridges those identities. However, engagement in the social practice of casually deciding the identities on behalf of others, including with no nomenclature of identity, um, undermines everyone's right to identity. For example, with GKD's recent resolution placing Wuhan in compliance with trans Africa. All of the language indirectly aimed at young trans athletes or misgendering in local print media denies children their right to identity. You say that we need to find ways to save our people. Does that include trans Samoros, trans Chamorros, and trans whites? And see, I understand the question. The answer yes.
I think it's final question because the other session's ended, so this would be the last question. And I'm pretty sure our lovely signers would love to answer questions if we approached up, I think. Right? I think just right. Yeah. Perfect. But yes, I think you have one more. You got Harmony. You're doing great.
Hopefully, on the subject, of self-determination being a fundamental human right for people is, uh, I'm sorry, uh, we're living in an unfortunate reality now where if you're associated with certain organizations, I mean, coming from a personal experience of being associated with an organization like Independent Gua, or someone who's not necessarily a part of the decolonization, like sees it as a radical, as a person being radical, but self-determination, shouldn't be like that. I think that's the case with a lot of activist movements is uh, people fighting to, for dreaming a different reality for people. And I guess my question would be, what would your, and from your experience, what would your perspective be of radical activism?
I'm a believer, and Jesus was the most radical of radical activists in history that I know of. And I say that because we need to put things into perspective. Trump is radical, so that's one form of radicalism that we need to be aware of, right? But nothing revolutionary has taken place in the history of humankind without radicalizing. Okay? So don't be afraid to be radical. I mean, heck, Sino Open I've been a radical for 50 years. we're exactly uh scary people, are we? So I'm saying that radical is a label that people like to throw out, kind of like a mine to trip you up. But don't be afraid of being radical. But there's a lot of forms of radicalism that are borderline the dangerous, right? Because you radicalize terrorists, you radicalize idiots, like the guy up there. I'm talking about the guy over there, not the guy up there. But so there are different forms of radicalism, and so it's kind of a concept that's highly politicized. But what radical means is just transformational at its core. There are ways that we can change the vocabulary to be more uncomfortable with what we really mean when we say we are activists. But people who are activists actively engage to change the status quo. So that there's nothing harmful or dangerous or bad about those of us who are seeking through activism, through being active, through exercising cultural sovereignty, through exercising our agency, right? Our knowledge, our wisdom, our strength, our insights to change an unacceptable condition. And so, whatever organization, a lot of, I know this because we've had to wade through all of that crap, okay, without trying to stick. So, you know what, how you wade through crap without getting stinky is to sidestep the crap, okay? Don't let the crap, don't immerse yourselves in the crap, walk around it. There are different paths. As Nana used to say, at the siyaw molo gimenan po potan sa mena, usagi potan san tati, and malolak ipotan san tati, sagi bintana, and kisigira bintana, pues ki isa papa isa ki. There are different ways of getting to where you need to go. Don't get caught up in that crappy place, okay, that people try to get you stuck in. Does that help? Okay.
It comes from the word radical, comes from the root word radis, which means roots. You go to the root of the problem to find the solution.
She's just shit. Okay. Thank you guys for joining us. For a second. I am super honored. I got my consciousness, my decolonization consciousness in the classroom at UMG, right? And so that's something that I take very seriously in my role at UMG because understanding that it is a privilege to have these conversations. And so what I tell my students though leaving the classroom is it shouldn't be a privilege. Now you gotta take these conversations and take them out of the classroom space or take them out of these spaces and make them right. To let people understand and to unpack these very lack of a better word, academic or very disconnecting language, right, or conversations and make them very real. One of the questions about how do you make it not a distant issue by getting it where your ice cream. How much is your ice cream? Now, why is it like that? The Jones Act, right? So it is your responsibility now to take these very, very insightful and powerful words from these wonderful ladies and unpack it home, unpack it with your friends, right? Have a glass of wine, have some dinner, and have these very, very crucial conversations about what decolonization means, not just for us, but for everybody here in Wine. Adjust. Bring the